Wait till you find out what JW, Jehovah Witnesses, what have they done when it comes to dealing with the United Nations.
I think you're all familiar with Isaiah 8, verse 20. If they speak not according to this word, there is what? 50% light? No light in them.
Hello friends, I got a video that I'm going to share with you today, and you need to listen to this from start to finish. There's a powerful message here, friends, and we have to get into it. And the title of this one, The Death of Truth, God Says, But I Think, How One Church Splits from the United Nations. Oh, wait till you hear that story. This is from Pastor Tim Rumsey. Pastor Tim Rumsey and I are in communication. I knew him for a little while now. We've done some work in the past, and he is coming to AMC. Stay tuned. But now, I want to quickly explain to you why we're having this video. This is an article posted on Adventist Review 2015, why Adventists participate in UN ecumenical meetings. And now, listen to some of the questions being asked here. And again, we're talking about 2015. This is not a new subject. By Ganoun Diop, Director of PAL, Public Affairs of Religious Liberty. Keep in mind that Ganoun Diop is no longer the director of PAL. He has been replaced by Nelu Bercia, who is now become the official director of Public Affairs Religious Liberty. So now we're going back to lay a foundation for what we're about to listen to in a minute. At the time, many people were asking the question concerning the UN to Ganoun Diop, and I want you to hear what he had to say. He said this in a testimony. Seventh-day Adventist believers shower me with the questions when they learned that I have represented Adventist Church in the United Nations and at meetings of Christians ecumenical organizations. So what was the answer that he gave? How exactly do Adventists view Christians' unity, interfaith relations, and ecumenism, they ask? Why do Adventists choose to accept and maintain only observer status and not membership among Christians' ecumenical organizations? Why do Adventists choose to mingle with other Christians and non-Christians while abstaining from becoming members of organized Christians and religious ecumenical bodies? My answer is simple, said Ganoun Diop. It is legitimate for all people of goodwill, interesting term, goodwill, to unite to save lives, to protect lives, to affirm the importance and sacredness of life. It is even urgent for all people to partner to make this world a better place for all human beings, contributing to better health, education, and humanitarian work in all dignity, freedom, justice, peace, and fraternity. This was the answer that he gave. So this is an admission also, right? So obviously there is a rationale. Let's get to the history. He's giving you his reasons. Now, again, we're talking about a 10 years ago article. That reasons remain the same. What about this history with the UN? This is the Adventist Review, January 27th, 1985. You can still pull this up under archives. And as you call down to the article, you will come across the father of Ted Wilson, Neil Wilson, played a significant role as far as the UN connection is concerned and the church NGO status. Now, when you go to page 7 of that article, I'm going to make sure you can see this. So right here on May 10th, right here is where this is revealed, okay? And it reads, on May 10, the United Nations recognized the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist as non-governmental organization, NGO, in consultative status with the Economic and Social Councils of the United Nations, as the United Nations Security Councils looks after the matter of war, peace. ECOSOC deals with the worldwide social, economic, humanitarian, and cultural questions, including human rights and religious liberty. So this is a bona fide date to keep in mind as we speak about this subject and as we go on to watch our video. This is the NGO status page of the United Nations, and you type Seventh-day Adventist, and there it is, 1985 application, special consultative status. There is a number of reports given here. We haven't seen the last two. And if you open up one of these reports, and here is one of them, one of the latest one, and there you can read into some of the things that the church is reporting to the UN as far as activities and ways that they're working around the world. There is a back and forth sharing of information and accountability as well that is happening in communication with the United Nations. So now, these are the things that I don't think you guys are new to this anymore. We've talked about this before, but it is still a concern. And we're about to do right now, we are going to listen to Tim Rumsey. I'm going to let him close this discussion. I'm not going to say anything else because his message is enough to make the point. I want you to engage with the information. Subscribe to the men's YouTube channel. There's going to be a link in the description below. He's coming to AMC to have a discussion. Furthermore, on many of these subjects as well. And let's engage in a comment below. I want to hear your thought. All right, take a listen to this video.
I only have one option, and that's truth. That's what he says in the next verse. My servants will hear my voice. Now, I want to look briefly as we close here at a case study for this third temptation of Satan. I'm going to tell you the story of a church that was founded in the 19th century in the eastern part of the United States. It grew out of a focus on intense Bible study, especially Bible prophecy, and it has since grown into a multinational, multi-member movement with a strong emphasis on witnessing and evangelism. Its core doctrines include the belief that Christ's literal coming has been or will be preceded by an invisible event in heaven in which Christ receives his kingdom. The church's historically skeptical view of the world politics left its members shocked by the revelation that its governing body was an approved member of the United Nations as an NGO. And I'm referring, of course, to the Jehovah's Witnesses. Maybe you know their story. In 1963, they voted officially to accept this resolution. This international organization, the United Nations, stands for world sovereignty by political men. For years, men without faith in God's kingdom have endeavored to get all people to worship this international image of human political sovereignty as the best hope for earthly peace and security, in fact, the last hope for humanity. However, we as witnesses of the sovereign God Jehovah will continue refusing to engage in such idolatrous worship, for we see under angelic enlightenment that God has smitten such idolaters with a malignant ulcer, symbolically speaking, that will spell death to them as spiritually diseased image worshipers who worship a man-made political creation rather than the creator of heaven and earth. That was a pretty strongly worded statement, wasn't it? And in 1963, the Jehovah's Witnesses officially voted to accept this as their church's official view and statement regarding the United Nations. Now, we, of course, don't agree with all of their views on prophecy or the Bible, but they have good reason for viewing the United Nations this way. Maybe you've heard of the United Nations Meditation Room, which is buried deep in the middle of the United Nations building there in New York City. Sometimes called a room of quiet, and it's very interesting. That block that you see is a 6-ton piece of iron ore, and the foundation goes all the way down to the bedrock. I don't know, probably hundreds of feet below. It's an altar, actually, 4 feet high. It rests on 2 narrow cross pieces. And there's a pamphlet that at least at one point was there explaining it, and it says this: "The stone in the middle of the room has more to tell us. We may see it as an altar, empty not because there is no God, not because it is an altar to an unknown God, but because it is dedicated to the God whom man worships under many names and in many forms." So is this room and this altar dedicated to the God of the Bible? There's absolutely no way, right? It's the other power in this world. And by the way, to get to this room, you have to walk kind of a maze or labyrinth, which is an occultic type thing, in darkness, and then you finally emerge into this light here. So the whole thing is just really very occultic, even the designs on that wall that you see there. Alice Bailey, who was kind of the prophetess of spiritualism, wrote this: "Evidence of the growth of the human intellect along the needed receptive lines for the preparation of the new age can be seen in the planning of various nations and in the efforts of the United Nations to formulate a world plan. From the very start of this unfoldment, 3 occult factors have governed the development of all these plans." And we don't need to worry about what those are. There's the connection, right? Here's another gentleman that for 40 years worked with the United Nations. He worked all the way up to Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, Robert Mueller, and he was often called the prophet of the United Nations. He wrote this: "No human force will ever be able to destroy the United Nations, for the United Nations is not a mere building or a mere idea. It is not a man-made creation. The United Nations is the vision light of the Absolute Supreme. At his choice hour, the Absolute Supreme will ring his own victory bell here on earth through the loving and serving heart of the United Nations." So the Jehovah's Witnesses had good reasons for being skeptical about what was happening there. I'll just share one more statement here. This was another religious leader that he was an Indian spiritual leader who taught meditation in connection with the United Nations. And he said, "The dream of the United Nations, the vision of the United Nations, the reality of the United Nations came from the highest, the absolute highest." Well, which highest do you think he's referring to? Can't be the God of the Bible. "For the establishment of world peace, the UN, the temple, UN, the shrine, UN, the heart, and UN, the soul are unparalleled. The United Nations is not a mere building. The United Nations is a reservoir of divine light for the manifestation of world peace." Okay. So all of that just to illustrate why the Jehovah's Witnesses were so skeptical and wary of the United Nations, and why they were so shocked in 2001 to discover that their church had secretly been a part of the United Nations for almost a decade. So the news story was broken by an article in The Guardian, British newspaper. And this was published on October 6, 2001. "The United Nations is being asked to investigate why it has granted associate status to the Jehovah's Witnesses, the fundamentalist U.S.-based Christian sect which regards it as the scarlet beast predicted in the book of Revelation." So they had been teaching their members for decades that the United Nations was the beast of Revelation 17. And now it turns out for 9 years, the leadership had secretly been connected with the United Nations. Disaffected members of the 6 million strong group, which has 130,000 followers in the UK, have accused the Witnesses' elderly governing body of hypocrisy in secretly accepting links with an organization that they continue to denounce in apocalyptic terms. Now, the newspaper article concluded this way: "In an internal document, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society describes its policy as a theocratic war strategy. It claims," and now they're quoting from the Watchtower magazine, which of course is the official magazine of Jehovah's Witnesses, "In time of spiritual warfare, it is proper to misdirect the enemy by" what? "Hiding the truth. It is done unselfishly. It does not harm anyone. On the contrary, it does much good." Do you hear Jesus saying that? I have to hide the truth in order to misdirect the enemy? Of course not. So this created a huge hubbub and turmoil within the Jehovah's Witnesses. And within 2 days of this newspaper article being published, the governing body of the Jehovah's Witnesses had sent in a letter to the United Nations requesting to withdraw their status as a NGO. And the day after that, on October 9, the UN replied saying, "We grant your request. You're now no longer part of the United Nations." It took all of 3 days to resolve the issue. So a week later, another article appeared in The Guardian. Here's what it said: "The Jehovah's Witnesses have hurriedly disaffiliated from the United Nations within days of a Guardian story in which members accused the sect of hypocrisy for supporting an organization it has repeatedly denounced privately." 2 Corinthians 6 verse 14 says that if we're going to serve God, we cannot be what? Unequally yoked with unbelievers. "For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness, and what communion hath light with darkness?" Now, that experience of the Jehovah's Witnesses is interesting for us today because in the last 6 months or so, it's become rather common knowledge within the Seventh Adventist Church that we're in much the same situation that the Jehovah's Witnesses found themselves in. And we have discovered that for 40 years, since 1985, our church has been recognized by the United Nations as an approved NGO. And there's a lot of people that are very disturbed about that. And I'm one of them. I believe the Bible is very clear that we should not be in these kinds of relationships. We can see all the reasons why. I've shared just a few of them right here. Jesus made it very clear in that third temptation. He was going to build his kingdom, but he was not going to use the world's methods. And he was not going to place himself under the devil's power and authority, which is what you're doing if you're recognized by the United Nations. It's very clear that all of these nonprofits that are recognized are there in order to repeat and disseminate the message and the mission of the United Nations. So we'll conclude with this, the Great Controversy, page 588. The line of distinction between professed Christians and the ungodly is now hardly distinguishable. Church members love what the world loves and are ready to join with them. And Satan determines to unite them in one body and thus strengthen his cause by sweeping all into the ranks of spiritualism. Papists, who boast of miracles as a certain sign of the true church, will be readily deceived by this wonder-working power. And Protestants, having cast away the shield of truth, will also be deluded. Papists, Protestants, and worldlings will alike accept the form of godliness without the power. And they will see in this grand union, grand movement for the conversion of the world and the ushering in of the long-expected millennium. This is still God's church, and God is still in control of it. You know, he allowed Jerusalem to continue going down its path for 39 years. We've been 40 years in this arrangement with the United Nations. I don't know how long God's going to allow it, but I have no doubt that God's going to fix the problem. Be praying about it. Pray for the people, pray for our leaders. Ask God to work his solution in his time. But we need to remember that there's only one safe way to determine truth, and that is what God says. Not what we think, not what we feel, but what God says. And if we put our foundation there, God promises that he will bring us home safely.